And welcome to this webinar hosted by HowNow and friends, how to close skills gaps without burning out your team. We'll kick off in a minute or so, but it's a pleasure to be joined by Tony from Pluralsight. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey Nelson, good to meet you. Good to be here.
We typically start these things, Tony, by just getting a feel for where's everyone joining from. So Tony, why don't you start us off? Where are you joining from?
Yeah, I'm actually just south of Washington DC on the east coast of the United States. So I'm joining from a city called Richmond. Morning here, afternoon for you folks, but pleasure to be here nonetheless.
Let us know where you're joining from. I always love to, I think we've had people join these sessions from every continent before, and sometimes joining us at crazy hours, which really does show a commitment to the cause. So the chat is open. Feel free to let us know where you're joining us from, and we'll kick things off shortly. I can see a lot of people joining in. Chat is open. And just to kind of set the housekeeping things there, like I said, the chat is open. Feel free to pop in any of your thoughts, anything you want to get off your chest while we're running the session. Feel free to drop it in the chat. You can also put your questions in and we'll pick them up as we go. But there is also a dedicated Q&A section right at the end. For those of you who are law-abiding, there is a dedicated Q&A section. If you'd rather put your questions in the Q&A sections instead of the chat, you can also do that. We will also have a poll just to get a sense check on a question that aligns quite nicely to what we'll be talking about today. And at the end of it, there'll be a good old survey because we'd love to hear what you enjoyed and what you'd like to see in future sessions, right? What topics do you want us to cover and dive deep into? And if there's anything we could have done better, we're constantly learning, and so we'd love to hear from you. And also, if you'd like to speak further, like we're going to be sharing you stories around how you can close those skills gaps without burning out, and of course, leveraging HowNow and Pluralsight together in order to be able to achieve that. If you would like to find out a bit more about HowNow, Pluralsight, or both of us together, then there will be a link at the end where you can book in a consultation, or you can reach out to us to book in some time, and we'll be more than happy to understand what you're looking for and also tell you more about how other organizations are doing it. Now, firstly, we do need to kick things off with a bit of an apology from Soros from Fleekbiz, who was supposed to be joining us today, but unfortunately, due to a personal emergency, he can't be here. He was very excited to talk about how his engineering team are using HowNow and Pluralsight to essentially upskill, but unfortunately, he can't be with us here today. But let's kick things off and dive in. Kick things off with a poll. Now, you will shortly see a poll on your screen. What we want to know is, for your next major upskilling initiative, what's the number one priority for you as an outcome? You've got, is it the speed to proficiency, how quickly you're able to close those critical gaps? Is it about employee well-being and ensuring that overall the upskilling process feels like a positive and an energizing one for the workforce? Or is it about proving the return on investment and clearly demonstrating business and financial impact? Is it about making sure you're future-proofing the organization and you're building those skills that you need for the next 2 to 3 years or beyond? Or is it something else that's not an option in the poll? Feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll give you a moment for everyone to respond. Now, let's show you what the results are saying. I'm really interested when you see the results, Tony, what your thoughts are on this. So here's what we've got. Majority of you are concerned about the speed to proficiency, so ensuring that you're able to plug those business gaps as quickly as possible. And of course, kind of related is ensuring that you're building the skills that you need to future-proof the organization. Tony, thoughts on on what you're seeing here? Does this kind of align with typically what you see in conversations with organizations you work with?
Yeah, I think they're two sides of the same coin, really. I mean, it's great that we need to close skill gaps quickly. Obviously, tech's moving faster than it ever has before. Humans have a hard time thinking exponentially. So from that perspective, you know, understanding what's next means that you can close skill gaps more meaningfully. And obviously, you know, that actually hits a sweet spot because I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in a while anyway. So I think that's exactly what we see from all of our customers.
Yeah, it's such an important point, the one you make around humans typically underestimate anything exponential. And you know, you see it with things like compound interest. We always underestimate how much interest rates can compound and you can make in savings, and how quickly something like the COVID virus is going to spread. And so we really do underestimate what exponential growth looks like. But it's great to see. I mean, this is pretty much aligned with what we tend to see. We do see a lot more organizations also talking about kind of proving the impact, right? Like it's getting tighter and tighter on budgets, and you really need to demonstrate where that money's going and whether it's delivering the value or not. So we do also see that come up a lot. Now, why are we talking about this topic about closing skills gap without burning out? Well, let me tee this up for you, because what we're starting to see is not just L&D, but also people working in HR are generally feeling under more pressure than ever before. And I'd love to hear in the chat if you're feeling this. Like this is like the toughest time to be in L&D or HR. I'd love to hear in the chat. But essentially, there's a couple of trends that are driving this kind of burnout and also a bit of kind of anxiety and nervousness around upskilling. On one side, you've got kind of CEOs who've got FOMO, right? You know, Tony touched on the fact that things are changing exponentially. They don't want to be left behind. They don't want the organization to be left behind. And so they want to know, you know, have we got the skills, the capability? Are we doing the things we need to be doing to be competitive in this market? And you know, any activity that we're doing in the organization, we really need to see the ROI, right? We shouldn't be spending things that are not having a meaningful impact on the business. And so CEOs have got FOMO, they want to see impact. And then, you know, CEOs have got FOMO, you've got employees who've got FOBO, right? Like the fear of becoming obsolete. People are worried that they've not got the skills to be relevant today. A recent Gallup survey found that 22% of people in the workforce have got the fear of becoming obsolete. And what was really interesting, it's not just people who've been in the workforce for a very long time. It's also people who are just entering the workforce feel like they don't have the skills to be relevant and meaningful in the workforce. And so, you know, they're overwhelmed and got a lot to do at work, and also overwhelmed by learning for the sake of learning. And so they're just being given a lot of irrelevant training, which they can't connect the dots to why it matters to their job today and how it's going to help them in their career. And then the third one, and this is an important one, and I'll come to this, is managers, right? Managers are being burnt out. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting data. And for those of you who are managers, I'd love to hear from you as well. That data shows this is the hardest time to be a manager right now. It's the most demanding workforce we've ever had. And this is panning out in the way managers feel. And as a result, we're getting more and more people who don't want to pick up management responsibility. They'd rather continue to grow as individual contributors. And one of the reasons is you've got employees who want to be supported in their learning and growth, going to managers and going, look, how are you going to help me grow? How are you going to help me do my job? And managers are not that well equipped or supported in order to be able to tailor the support they need to give. And we're going to come to this in a bit more detail shortly. Now, all of these three personas are turning around and looking at L&D and putting pressure on L&D to go, look, what are you doing to help me? And so everyone is under pressure. And as a result, we're not able to fill those gaps, and we're feeling the pressure of that, which can end up with a lot of burnout. Now, what can we do here? What's driving, when you look under the hood, what's driving this burnout, and what can we do about this? Now, some of you who are familiar, have been to one of the sessions we've done before, you'll know we often talk about this idea of a learning impact pyramid, where essentially what at the top of the pyramid you have here is what every business is trying to do. Every business has a mission, a strategy on how they're going to deliver that mission, and objectives to see whether they're on track. And what we typically find is what we're doing from a learning and development perspective is not aligned with what's happening at the top of that pyramid. And often we find it hard to connect those dots. And what that typically looks like is you've got overwhelmed employees. Now, this might come out in employee engagement surveys where you're getting feedback saying, the learning and development opportunities are not great. And you're sitting there confused because you're like, we spent so much money on all of these different learning programs, but people are still complaining that there's not enough. That often shows a bit of a misalignment between learning and what the business needs. And then you've got your frustrated managers who aren't able to support their workforce and not able to achieve the objectives they need because they don't have the skills to drive performance. And quite often it looks like an L&D team who can't prove value. And what you do is when you can't prove value, you often lean on proving effort, right? So we talk about how many courses we've created or how many courses we've procured. That's us kind of leaning on a crutch to go, look, I am doing work. Here's me proving my effort, but it's not the impact the business wants to see. So essentially you end up with activity without impact, and it's like running on a treadmill, but not getting anywhere. And that can end up with burnout, not just with those of you in L&D and HR, but also the broader team getting frustrated, anxious, and under pressure. Now, we find the missing link here is skills. Skills is that shared language that helps us describe business context to make sure learning is relevant, right? If you look at that top of the pyramid, you can deconstruct those objectives to understand what skills are required to be able to achieve that objective. Suresh, welcome. Nice to be to you guys. We'll jump in shortly at the end. So at the objectives, we'll be able to break that down into what skills are required by teams and individuals to be able to deliver that objective. And then you'll be able to connect your learning initiatives directly to those skills. And so this way you're able to connect those dots. What learning is relevant for the skills we need to be able to achieve those objectives. Now, this ensures instead of playing L&D bingo, where you're randomly calling out a number and hoping the other person has the matching number and losing most of the time, instead, you can ensure every time you play L&D bingo, there is a winner and you're matching learning to the skills that are required to deliver those objectives. Now, in order to connect learning to work, a key persona here are managers, right? It's critical in order for L&D not to feel like you're having to take on all of the burden and drive this strategy top down. We need to lean on our managers to be the multipliers to drive that skills growth. Managers understand the context of the performance that's required in a way far better than we could do from a top-down perspective from L&D. So to reduce the load on both L&D and people teams, but also to ensure a higher level of relevance, managers are a key lever. And what I'm going to spend the time in the rest of my session is to go how we can leverage managers in order to be able to reduce the admin and workload to be able to close those skills gaps and ensure we're upskilling people in a relevant and meaningful way. Now, this is what I'm going to tell you, a little playbook that we recommend to organizations we work with, which we call the Learning as Leverage playbook. And so just running through the steps of what this looks like. We typically recommend a manager to go through these steps. They all start with S, just so it's easy to remember, in a way where you can apply how you should be thinking about learning, using learning as leverage. Now, this really comes from one of my favorite management books of all time, called High Output Management, which was written by a guy called Andy Grove, who is a former CEO of Intel, who looks at, a team's output is how you measure a manager's output. And one of the highest leverage activities you can do as a manager is training your people so you can increase your team's output. And this is an approach that was used significantly at Intel to be the success story that they are today. And so it starts with first spotting, right? So it's being able to spot what are the skills gaps that are stopping this particular role from achieving the objectives that they need to, and what's blocking them from achieving those goals. Once you spot the skills, you now define where do they need to go? What are the skills that they need to focus on in order for you to achieve those OKRs for a particular quarter, right? For example, you might have 10 different skills gaps, but there might only be 4 that you need to focus on to really move that needle in that next quarter. So it's that alignment between the manager and the direct report to go, these are the areas I want you to focus on. And now you share relevant learning. And now this is an important one because a manager knows it's not just about e-learning courses, right? There's a whole broad range of resources and opportunities to help someone build the skills they need. It could be hands-on practice, like what Pluralsight offers alongside more structured learning pathways. It could be things like blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, informal resources like that. It might be knowledge that's created and shared by internal subject matter experts, but it's enabling the managers to be able to connect their direct reports with the most relevant learning resources and opportunities in a targeted manner. But it's not just about sharing structured learning. You also need to create a space for them to practice. Now, I mentioned the hands-on practice from Pluralsight. I'm also going to give you a few more examples of how you can use AI to be able to scale personalized practice, coaching, and instant feedback at scale, but to be able to support people to be able to turn that knowledge into a skill. And then we've got to observe the outcome. Now, this is often a blocker I hear from managers, which is they can't see whether the learning someone's doing is actually translating into a performance improvement or a skills growth. So being able to observe the outcome and the progress someone's making is key. Now, this is what that playbook looks like for you to leverage learning, these 5 steps. Now, it probably all makes sense, but what we find is when we speak to managers, it's hard for them to run this playbook for multiple reasons. Quite often, they're having to guess, right, what skills are needed, what skills people have, where the gaps are. There's too much admin for them to be able to connect their team with relevant learning and also to be able to observe progress, whether we're moving in the right direction or not. There's just not enough of them to be able to scale this across everyone that they manage. And in the end, they can't tell you whether it's worth it or not because they have no visibility of the impacts they're having. Now, this is where the last part of what I want to show you is how organizations we work with today are leveraging AI and our broader platform in order to be able to implement this learning as leverage playbook to be able to scale how they close skills gaps. Now, let's run through these steps. Now, the first one I said is about spotting those gaps. Now, this is where what you can do is we leverage AI at HowNow to be able to use labor market data to tell you exactly what skills are required for each person to be able to do their job. Each job role is deconstructed into tasks, and then we use AI to be able to infer what skill and proficiency level is required for someone to be able to do that job. We then have a built-in 360 skill review process that, based on self, peer, and manager review, will tell you where this person's average proficiency level is for a particular skill. Now, with a purpose-built dashboard for managers, they're able to easily analyze the role readiness of each person in their team and identify where the gaps are. So that's how they can spot the blockers and skills gaps that are going to stop them from achieving their OKRs. Now they can ask an AI analyst to identify those gaps. Now, if you think about your current process today, how would a manager go about identifying what those skills gaps are? Well, quite often we've heard from teams, they might have a spreadsheet that has all of their skills in it, which isn't good enough. Or you could be leveraging skills data both from HowNow, but also you could use Skills IQ from Pluralsight to be able to get an understanding of what skills people have, but where are the gaps that are affecting your OKRs. Now that you know where the gaps are, you can now choose your focus areas. Now, this is where you have something called focus skills in HowNow. And typically what organizations do is, as a part of the manager one-to-one, they would agree on what skills we're going to focus on for this quarter or the next 2 quarters. Now, what this does is it informs the AI-powered recommendation engine to prioritize learning recommendations that align to the skills that you and your manager want to focus on over the next quarter or 2. We know what your gaps are. We know what your skills priorities are. Now it's about connecting the relevant learning to those gaps. Now, this is where now what you have is tools for AI-enabled tools for the manager to be automatically given access to relevant learning resources that they can then assign to direct reports and one level of indirect reports in their team, making it easy for a manager to manage the learning and development of their direct reports and indirect reports, rather than just being dependent on the L&D team to do all of the assignment and sharing of learning. What they can also do is leverage AI to create targeted skill development pathways, right? It's very powerful to have a meaningful pathway that's aligned to the gaps that I have. But we all know it takes a lot of admin to be able to create a pathway. And even then, we can't personalize it in a way that has one-to-one relevance. Now, this is where you can use HowNow's AI Pathway Builder to be able to essentially curate learning resources, stuff that you've created yourself, but also resources from Pluralsight, to create a structured, targeted development pathway that you can then assign to a cohort of people, or even to a single individual that reports into you. What you can also do is, rather than just a structured learning pathway, you can create communities. So I can create a community of back-end engineers, and then essentially add an AI curator that automatically curates the most relevant learning resources for the community of back-end engineers, and making it easy for them to discover the most relevant learning for them that's aligned to the skills that they're trying to build. Now, like I mentioned, quite often what happens is we only focus on knowledge-based learning. But at the end of this, we don't want a whole load of people who know what to do. We need them to do. And so to bridge that gap from learning to doing, this is where it's important to support people in the flow of work. Now, this is where, I'm sure Tony will mention it, Pluralsight offers hands-on practice, but what we also offer within HowNow is something called Guru, which is an AI agent that you can leverage that essentially creates real-world practice scenarios for you to practice scenarios based on your organization's knowledge base, get instant feedback and coaching. Now, if you imagine, this is the type of thing that would have been very dependent on humans and therefore quite difficult to scale if you're a lean team. But now with AI, you can scale coaching in a hyper-personalized way, giving everyone access to a coach who's trained on learning the best practices in learning science. And I touched on feedback. Quite often, one of the biggest bottlenecks is getting timely feedback for someone to be able to grow. And this is what leveraging an AI agent like Guru allows you to do, is give everyone access to instant feedback. And you want to make this available directly within the apps and tools where people work. And so this is where, with HowNow's integrations into platforms and apps and tools that you use, every individual in your team can surface relevant knowledge directly within those tools, so they're not having to switch context. Now, the last one I want to leave you with is, to create that positive feedback loop, managers need to be able to see the impact of the learning people are doing. Now, this takes us back to the beginning of the cycle, where you can use the AI analyst to essentially ask questions around the progress people are making. So you can ask more sophisticated questions like, are people learning things that are related to their role? Have they closed the skills gaps that we asked them to focus on? This way, you're not having to export a whole bunch of spreadsheets and do pivot tables just to find out whether the learning people are doing is working or not. You can see whether people are on track, and AI will generate magic buttons, so you can automatically hit the magic button to send reminders and nudges, so you're not having to spend time chasing people. Instead, you can automate a lot of that experience. And the last one, it kind of closes off where we started, where it starts with turning those 360 skill review into growth conversations around what areas you need to work on and seeing whether people are progressing. Now, the 360 skill review is a really deliberately light touch way of checking in whether people are growing in the skills that you need them to grow. Now, look, what I've shown you there is a practical guide on how we're seeing managers and leaders today leverage the HowNow platform and our AI agent in order to be able to take the admin load out of the upskilling process and to really reduce that burnout. Now, that's leveraging technology, and in a completely different strategic approach, I'm happy to hand over to Tony to talk about how cross-skilling is probably just as important, if not more important, than your upskilling and reskilling initiatives that you're running. Over to you, Tony.
Oh. Thanks very much. Okay. Let's share my screen a little bit. I don't normally do slides, everybody, so they're pretty rudimentary. Let's set this up. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. Can you see that, Nelson?
I can indeed.
Fantastic. All right. Yep. So I've got a slide deck today. It's not particularly complex, but I've got a face for radio, so it's probably better you look at the slides rather than me. As Nelson already mentioned, I'm going to talk very briefly about upskilling with cross-skilling. So Nelson's already talked about upskilling. So cross-skilling is the other part of the puzzle. We're going to talk about what's next. Okay. Very briefly. You know, we need to cross skills and not cross our fingers because we've got skill gaps everywhere. This is something that Nelson already touched on. You know, we've got pressure to move fast, but not only do we need to move fast, we need to do it with confidence and we need to do it with competence. So what's next is really critical to plan for. It's the question that I hear every time I go and see a customer, every time I meet an L&D person with their strategy deck. This is the number one question that I get most often is how do we plan for what's next? So just a bit of background on me. What qualifies me to talk about this? Well, because I work in solution consulting, the teams that I worked with and the teams that I work in have lived this kind of technology pivot every day. We hit the front line of these problems with every customer that we meet, whether it be in consulting or delivery. We live in the messy middle of the tech transformation, much like you folks probably do. Every week brings a new platform or a new platform shift or an architecture change or a customer with new requirements that none of us have seen before. And the problem that we have is that with every job change, we have to learn entirely new technologies. So today I'm a solution consultant for Pluralsight. Next week, I might be a solution consultant for Cisco Systems or something like that. So it's just as important that we know how to relearn how the new technology intersects with everything that we've experienced previously. Okay, so what we do is we train to adapt constantly, building a more complex lattice work of technology mental models and applications. So in essence, we're professional technology pivoters. And whether you realize it or not, most of the organizations that you work in are already doing the same thing. So let's touch on something that we touched on at the beginning. We need to close skill gaps, but the problem is that the pace of technology is exponential. And this slide is an example of that. So a couple of years ago, you know, this slide would have been relevant and super sort of up to date. But the problem is because exponential change is so difficult, actually rewriting this slide every time technology changes is a chore in itself. So it just goes to show how fast stuff is changing. And part of the problem that we have is we have this false promise that's delivered to us from the education system of linear upskilling. You know, but let's start with the reality check here. For years, upskilling for us is learn skill A, get role B, climb the ladder, and then repeat. The problem we have today is that technology is not only growing exponentially, which we've already touched on, but it's rapidly becoming a much smaller part of the journey. So we can master a framework today and find it deprecated 6 months or a year from now. And in fact, I believe the industry stat is that technology skills life averages around 2.5 years. That means by the time 2.5 years passes, a tech skill is starting to show its age. So we can land a new role and still feel uncertain because the tools and the teams and the terrain keep shifting underneath us. And I think the truth is upskilling builds depth, which is really important. And we've already touched on that. But cross-skilling let's try that again. But cross-skilling builds your range. So when technology is volatile, we've got AI, we've got cloud that we've just gone through, adaptability becomes really the focus of what we need to do. So cross-skilling isn't just more training. When we say cross-skilling, we don't mean throwing spaghetti at our teams and hope that some of it sticks to them. We're talking about deliberately building adjacent and complementary skills through cross-skilling. meaning that we're not locked into a single function. It's what differentiates between being a specialist or being adaptive. And they don't necessarily have to be separate things. They can be the same things, because you can have specialists that are adaptable. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about building workforce astronauts within our teams, okay? And I'll explain why. It helps our organizations become more anti-fragile and more resilient against stress points. And it allows us to kind of react to changes that we don't see. And it allows us to build pattern recognition across technology domains where they intersect. So when you're a cloud engineer and you're working in cloud, you're not just dealing with cloud, you're probably dealing with data. You're probably dealing with single sign-on. You're probably dealing with networking. So no technology domain, especially with AI and the way that that's intersecting with everything, there is no such thing as a single domain anymore. And what cross-skilling allows us to do is to say yes to more tech pivot opportunities in our organizations, because we can adapt at speed. So here's the important thing. If you think we're not cross-skilling today, you're wrong, because you already did it, or you're doing it right now. You did it with cloud, you did it with data. And if you're not already doing it, you'll soon be doing it with artificial intelligence. And I think the real question isn't whether we cross-skill. The question is whether we do it with intention and preparation, or are we going to react when it's forced upon us? Because when the skill gaps are exposed, the people who sometimes get displaced aren't the ones who couldn't learn, but the ones who didn't adapt. A little tip of the hat to Darwin there. So cross-skilling isn't optional anymore. It's the baseline of how we stay relevant, especially when it comes to how artificial intelligence is a kind of force multiplier with everything that we do. So why does it matter to your organization? Well, it's a business continuity strategy. It shortens ramp time for teams, and it enables internal mobility, so people can move around with much greater ease. If I've got a cloud engineer that's got a healthy side of networking, then why can't he do a short attachment to the networking team and build that strength a little bit more? Why can't he move around a little bit? It protects against over-specialization, and for individuals, it's how we stay valuable. It's how we stay useful in the face of change when it happens. It's how we hedge against irrelevance. So that's really important, because in organizations, it allows us to redeploy our talent more effectively and more quickly and fill those internal skill gaps, or even bridge them while we're trying to fill them, and reduce time to impact. Because when technology changes, or when we hit situations, maybe someone's left your organization, sitting around and waiting to hire someone back in that role isn't an option anymore. How can we bridge that gap until we can backfill that person? It helps us retain high performers, because we provide them not only with opportunities to grow upwards, but also opportunities to grow across and be able to lean on different roles and different interests, because nobody likes to eat the same meal every day for the rest of their life. And I think for lean teams, the leaner your team is, the more it allows you to do more with what you already have, because people can stretch and adapt. But the real win here as well is for the individuals, because it creates career insurance for them. It gives them lateral mobility in order to move sideways when the market moves. It keeps us employable, it keeps us promotable, and it keeps us ready to encounter whatever's next. And it gives us confidence to do that. Because let's face it, careers aren't simply ladders anymore. It's more akin to pathfinding, and that's why the HowNow AI tool is so important, as Nelson was just talking about, because finding the path through our career, finding our paths through what we need to do and where we need to go is much more important than just being thrown an ILT course or something like that. The more handholds we have when we're climbing through our organization, the further we can go and the less likely we are to fall. So let's move briefly from accidental to intentional, okay? We need to move from job titles to skill graphs. We need to stop strictly defining people by what they're called. Sure, it's a useful guide, but start understanding what they can do. And again, you know, the HowNow analytics helps you understand exactly what they can do. Let's try and understand if we can build a living map of their skills and their adjacent capabilities and their transferable knowledge, because that's how we uncover hidden mobility. If you think the people in your organization that you're not using for artificial intelligence aren't using ChatGPT or Claude AI or something like that at home, you're mistaken. And if you can map those skills and bring them in, suddenly you start to be able to leverage a different part of your workforce that you didn't see before. And we need to move from learn this to try that. And again, Nelson touched on this. We need to encourage folks to go hands-on with the new technologies that are outside of their comfort zone. Get out of the categorization box and give them a safe zone where they can stretch and play with new technologies like artificial intelligence or cloud or whatever. The fastest ways to build cross-skill confidence is with low stakes and high feedback environments. Again, feedback critical, as Nelson already mentioned. I think, lastly, we need to move from pipelines to meshes. Okay, talent doesn't move in a straight line anymore, so we can't manage people like they're flowing through a funnel as easily as we could. We need to build a talent mesh, one where people can shift sideways. We need to understand that if we have people in our data organization, they also need cloud skills, but they also need AI skills, and they need to have all of these adjacencies to help them work. And you need to understand and build into our organizations the concept that going broad and having range isn't waste, it actually builds resilience. Okay, and to close it up, we go back to our starting point. How do we plan for what's next? Well, hopefully you've understood from this that we don't wait for the answer to be handed down to us. What we do is we build the capacity to respond no matter what the answer is. Cross-skilling isn't a tactic, it's a mindset and it's a strategy, and it's how we make sure that our organizations don't get out innovated and we're prepared to pivot to whatever comes down the pike for us next. Because the future doesn't belong to those who know the most. It belongs to those who can learn and adapt within the environment as it changes. And that, in essence, is the cross-skill advantage. It starts now, not with crossed fingers, but with crossed disciplines. And with that, I'll hand it back to Nelson.
Thanks, Tony. I mean, there's so much in there to unpack. And, if anyone's got questions, feel free to post them in the chat or in the Q&A. Kind of reminding me, Tony, of the shift I'm also seeing in the conversations I'm having from, once upon a time, you kind of talk about T-shaped skills where you've got a broad horizontal and specializing in one area, but actually now the movement is towards kind of M-shaped, right? And you're getting multiple specialisms, but across a broad bit of domains. And, I think it ties nicely with what you said around the job types, because going back to the point I mentioned around Gen Z being more and more reluctant to kind of progress to become managers, we need an alternative path to offer them to be able to progress, right? And in order for them to be able to progress as an individual contributor, we now need to look at skill stacking as that way of progress, rather than just becoming a manager as the only sign of progress.
Yeah, right? And I think anyone that's worked in a startup environment knows this. You don't, when you hire people in startups, you're looking for a particular kind of person. You're not looking for that guy that's specialized. You're looking for the guy that, hey, something else has happened over here and we don't have anybody for it. Who's going to step into that role? Can you jump in there, wear this new hat for the day and help lift things higher, because we don't have an answer to that right now. And I think what we need to do is just take that kind of startup mentality and just bring it across to the larger organizations to say, hey, it's important, your job is important, but you also have to have the potential that you can put any hat on at any given time if we need it to happen, because, the world's changed a lot in how we deal with tech.
It's also changing the job market, right? We were looking at data around, let's say someone like a content marketing manager. If you look at the job title, hasn't changed in the last decade, but if you look under the hood around the skills that are required, once upon a time, you may have just needed a content marketer to write SEO content. And now, you need them to be able to edit videos across different social platforms and design assets. And it's a great indication of the skills are changing. And the reality is, when you're in a competitive market going for a job, they're now looking at your skill stack rather than, you are a content marketer for X number of years. Doesn't really tell me what you're capable of doing. There's so much more to discuss on this, and obviously we're going to open up to Q&A. Before we do that, Soresh, thanks again for joining. Suraj is joining us from Fleekbiz. He's the CTO there, and he's basically living and breathing a lot of what me and Tony have been talking about. And I just wanted to start, Suraj, with, when we did the poll at the start of the session and we asked people, what's the outcome that they want to see? And it kind of tells you where their concerns are. It was really around speed of proficiency, right? And given what Tony's just told us about technology skills and how quickly they're changing and it's being disrupted, I imagine that keeps you up at night. How are you tackling this, making sure your technology team are up to date and proficient in the skills they need to be?
I mean, it's a loaded question. So, look, Nelson, I think so speed of proficiency, that is something that I'm concerned with. But as somebody who's having to actually deliver and respond to a lot of the customer needs and deliver those things, and when I look at and I could actually, I guess, a couple of years ago, and I think trends been happening. It's and there were a lot of signs that this is where it's going to be. You will have AI that's already showing signs to become the biggest productivity multiplier that you'll ever see. I mean, I think I haven't seen an innovation like this in last 30 years since .com, when the internet was born, and now this. So of course, there with that comes a lot of enablement, and businesses start getting the ideas of what we can do. But then you always go back and see, okay, what have we done for last 30 years? Well, we've built, because we didn't know that this is what the world was going to be. So a lot of our processes, a lot of our skills, and I almost, one thing Tony said was, the small medium enterprises and enterprises need to become more startup like, and I don't know how that's going to happen, because they're so fixed. What happens is, I don't know if you ever heard of a cow path theory. The first cow that finds the water, everybody else follows the same cow path. So even if the cow went this way, this way, this way to get to the water, even if the water was a straight line, it's just you actually follow that path. I think businesses are in their own way, because at some point you do have to streamline things, you do have to establish processes, and that process, well, it works very well when the world is stagnant and doesn't change, and AI type of stuff is not happening. It would work, but now they all have to change. So everybody, like he said, has to wear multiple hats. Generalist is actually the way to survive the next 5 years. A specialist is not. There is still place for it, but it's not a very widely desired skills. There are needs for folks to be able to wear multiple hats and be able to jump in and do those things. So yes,
Yeah.
so speed to proficiency for me, I always go back to, okay, I saw this trend, then I was like, okay, where does my organization stand today? What do I want my business to be able to do in a year or 2 year from now? Then I look and see, okay, what are my skills today? What are the skill gaps do I have? And sort of that's what led into HowNow. And there was a very specific reason for HowNow. A lot of people in the organizations, they came up with, okay, well, Sarosh, why don't we just do Udemy for enterprise and Pluralsight for business and whatnot? And then I look at HowNow. HowNow is allowing me to take the best from everybody, and build my own curriculum, because you have to realize, even with the best course catalog that Pluralsight would have, or Udemy would have, or LinkedIn or whatnot, it would always be, it would just not serve the purpose for everybody. There would always be something. They might be 80% for some people, and 20% remains. But I like the flexibility of being able to pick the best from each, and actually design my own curriculum. And I thought that would be the differentiator, because I didn't want to get Udemy for enterprise, because I don't want 90% of my workforce watching how do I quit my 9 to 5 job and go become an entrepreneur or whatnot, because it's a huge catalog, and it's got everything for everybody, but it's not what I needed, and I needed very high quality courses. I needed assessments and whatnot. And when you go to Udemy, you'll find 10 courses for the same topic, or a lot of irrelevant, and people get distracted. So for me, it was, all right, let me get the best of Pluralsight, let me get the best of Udemy, let me get the best of LinkedIn, and I just carved my own path, and
Yeah.
that was the goal. And I think, yeah.
And I know, sorry, we were discussing before that, yeah, you can have the, obviously you're using Pluralsight and HowNow to upskill your team. But bringing in the right technology is half of the problem. The other half is the actual change management within your own organization, right? And I spoke about this at the beginning of the session, that leaders and managers play a critical role in kind of taking away the L&D burden and ensuring upskilling actually happens. And I know you've done some interesting things around operationalizing learning and training. So it'd be great to hear some of that.
Yes, so that was, I think, it wasn't my original idea. Of course, I borrowed it from Google. I like to ride on the shoulder of giants. If somebody's done something right, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. One of the things Google did, this was 20 years ago, if you can believe it. I don't know if they still have the culture. I feel like some of the good things tend to go away as you become more bigger and whatnot. But Google had this thing where they had allocated 20% of the workforce to actually learn and do things that are not part of their core job, and so everybody could be innovator. And if we had more time, I'd tell you a story, and it's actually been proven how that worked and why that worked. But basically, if you look at our performance appraisal, annual, quarterly and annual reviews, you'll see uh, about 20%, and 15% of that is learning. 5% is actually just doing something outside of your core job. But 15% of that is actually learning. And a lot of learning is actually designed for them to transform into generalists. And I'll I always get, okay, we have ChatGPT, we have Gemini's. I could look like a very smart guy just by whatnot, and that's not true, unfortunately. Try giving ChatGPT to a junior engineer and see if you can get a productive software out. It's not true, and I think folks on the call, whoever has experience with that, will know. ChatGPT and Gemini, they're yes man. They're designed to ask they're designed to answer what you prompt them. So there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that is still in the prompter's head, and that knowledge isn't just going to come from ChatGPT. That's actually what's going to come from the skills, the courses, and so none of that goes away. You still have to extract the right things and the right values from these AI productivity tools, and think of them as tools. It's a GPU running somewhere. Do not get all overly sentimental about these things, that they are a computer somewhere in the data center. But I think that's what it is. It's just being able to actually increase their knowledge in cross discipline. Like Tony said, because that way I get more breadth, more coverage, more people that can solve a wider problem. Then so imagine if the world is moving so fast, I have to deliver all these business applications. I've got a BA that needs to analyze all this stuff. Then he does all this stuff, and then it goes to product manager. Product manager puts it in his backlog, and then he works with the stakeholder, prioritize, and then he gives it to a designer to design stuff, and the designer gives it to front end, the front end guy gives it to back end. And if you just wanted a one line of code change, uh, that's a very intense process today, especially for organizations. So if you've got generalists that can at least go across the processes until the organizations get to that startup mentality, I think that will happen. It's not practical right now because they're in their own way, but I think at the people and the skill level, we could still make a difference. So it's more of
Yeah.
a bottom-up revolution than a top-down revolution.
And Tony, just on that, I guess, coming back to you around the cross-skilling piece, and Tony, are there any particular things you're seeing organizations who do cross-skilling well? Is there like a common pattern that you're seeing and things they do that make them effective at cross-skilling?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point actually. And when I speak to our customers, especially our customers in the government space, one of the things I already tell them is you're already experts at cross skilling. So if you think of paras, or if you think of SAS, or if you think of the Navy skills, that SEALs, all of them are incredibly talented at doing multiple things. They're elite because they can do all these different things. So cross-skilling is vital, and it's really interesting to say to people, if you actually go and look at how the military does it, they basically say if we cross-skill people, then our missions are much less likely to fail, because if one guy can't perform for some reason, we've got 2 or 3 other guys that can probably approximate everything he does and pick up the slack. I wanted to touch on one thing that Suresh said very briefly as well, which I think was really insightful, because a lot of people sort of say, well, I'm going to use ChatGPT for this, or I'm going to use Claude AI. And one of the things that they don't realize when they're using something like that, and it makes us feel great, is that they're all leaning towards pleasing the user that's interacting with them. So you can be sitting there and going, okay, teach me something. Okay, I've learned it. I can go and be a security specialist now. Oh, absolutely. You're totally awesome. And you could go and be a security specialist anywhere. And I think it gives people a false sense of where they're at. So going back to your roles and going back to what Suresh said, I think you have this situation where the platforms that we're trying to bring to people give them a little bit of a reality check and help them understand where they're actually at, rather than having a GPT or something tell you you're the most awesome person that it's ever come across and there's nobody quite like you, which I think, I'm hoping they're going to fix one day. But for right now, that's something we have to deal with.
It's so true. For anyone who thought an ideal world would be where you're just surrounded by people who agree with you, and then you start using these tools and you're like trying to get some sense of critical evaluation, and actually anything you say is great. Well done. I think that really, nothing could be more patronizing. I'm going to come to the questions in the chat, and feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're happy to take them. I've got a question here by Raise, how do you deploy HowNow? How do you perform organization readiness to change feasibility? So look, often it's quite a common one for people to think this is a big change. And it's a common question we get asked is, are we ready for this? But if you take a step back, actually, it isn't as big a change as you think it is. Quite often, much like Tony said, in some shape or unstructured form, you're doing this, but just not as informed and structured as it could be, right? Like you're already as a manager probably thinking about, well, what are the areas that this person in my team needs to be good at? What are the areas they're actually good at, where the gaps are? And you're thinking about what learning would help them do that. Now imagine having the technology in place that takes away the admin and friction to do that. So actually the technical setup and implementation, people often think that takes a long time. No, in this day and age, tools are they connect with your existing HR systems and any content libraries that you might have to, it will be able to connect. And then the skills ontology or taxonomy and the mapping works straight out of the box because it's using labor market data. So the actual technical setup isn't there, but it is absolutely a changing culture, right? Because if you're moving from a culture which was quite, let's say, compliance focused from an L&D perspective, and it was just kind of top down, I push out content, you have to do this content mandated. That's quite a change to moving towards a more kind of skills first approach, where instead of asking what content do you need, I'm now asking what skills do you need, right? And that's a changing question, and that changes how you go. So I often say it just requires L&D to have a rebrand. Right, L&D in your organization needs a rebrand, and that's the big part of the change. But I think if you're here, that probably shows readiness. And if you're getting feedback from engagement surveys and exit interviews saying, I don't feel like I'm supported in my growth, that's probably quite a telltale sign that you need to change the way you're doing things. Look, more than happy to have a deep dive conversation in terms of how it works and how you improve. Yeah, sure.
So look, I've actually deployed this, folks. It's less than 1 week to actually have all the content integrated, all the sign-ons integrated, and you know whatnot. What's harder is actually the cultural part. It's got nothing to do with the tool, and it's you know what I always feel. You know, it's I don't know if we're always looking for scapegoats or what. I just don't like when we're always saying, well, it's the tool. Look, there's nothing that we can just buy, drop it in, and magically have it work. The you know, we all know about the people process tools. You know, it's a tool is brilliant. I can vouch for that. You know, I've done it. It does all the technical things, and you know, it's coming from somebody who's actually been doing this for 25 years, and last 3 years I've been doing a lot of tech projects, AI products, and you know, so it's a very easy to integrate tool. It works with all the sign-ins, content libraries, all this stuff. Where you know where and there's more assistance coming from like the guru and you know that type of stuff. So it is enforcing the training behavior. It's honestly it's always the people process part of the things that are the hardest, which is more of an internal facing problem than a tool problem. I would say the same thing for Pluralsight too. It's just I think that's something we just you know, as a customer, and you know, I've seen this, and it's an internal problem that we have to figure out. How do we enforce, not enforce, you know, then it goes back to
encourage
compliance.
culture, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So and that's a really interesting point that you raised there. And obviously it looks like someone in the chat also found it interesting about developing culture. So here's the thing. What L&D have to do is they have to have a little bit of a mind shift. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to change. L&D for years has been a push endeavor. It's like, we've got learning, we're going to push it into the organization. What you need to do is you need to flip the mindset and say, and treat your learning platforms as a benefit, as a perk. So, hey, we've given you access to tens of thousands of courses here, and you can go and understand, you can learn anything you want, you can take your career in any direction. We ask you to do the learning that we want you to do, and so you demonstrate that from the top. You know, our leaders are going to show you they're using the platform to build their skills. We're going to lead by example. And then from that point, when you start to get the organization really realizing that learning is actually a developer for their career, then learning starts to become something that they pull towards them, something that they want, something that they consume. So that's literally what it is. It's helping people do that. And you can do that with gamification. You can recognize people on a monthly basis. This person made the most progress in their skills development. You know, $100 Amazon cards or whatever, £100 Amazon cards, whatever it is you want to do. There are many, many ways to incentivize learning. But the most important thing is taking it from, this isn't a work tool, this is a career development tool. This is for you as much as it is for us, because when your teams embrace learning and continuous learning, the organization automatically wins from that anyway. There is no loser in the equation. And it's such an important point to get across is it's not a tool to beat you with. It's not a stick to beat you with. It's a carrot to say, come and join us and come and use the tools that we've provided for you to improve your career, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I mean, just to close out, we're a minute off on time, but it is going back to that idea of no one really cares that there's a new library or a new tool, but what they care about is what's in it for them. And I think it's really being able to effectively communicate what's in it for them rather than telling them something that you're doing. Look, we could go on, and it's such a big topic to kind of talk about on this. But you know, if you do want to continue the conversation, feel free to, like I mentioned, you can book in some time with us. You can find all of us on LinkedIn and continue the conversation. I'm sure none of us will mind. Thank you again to Sarosh from Fleekbiz for joining and sharing your insights, and of course Tony for joining us from Pluralsight and talking us through cross-skilling. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to all of you for taking time out in your morning, afternoon to join us here. Please do take 30 seconds to fill in the survey link. It really helps us in terms of the schedule of sessions that we should be running moving forward. So let us know your feedback, and we're constantly looking to get better at this. Sorry, we can't take any more questions, but let's connect after this and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.